excited. Let's get excited for a new beginner's guide. Welcome everybody. I'm a music nerd here. And we are going to dive into a new beginner's guide episode. This time we're going to do the neo-soul genre. Before we get into it, please hit the subscribe button down below. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the video. And if you're a return subscriber, hit the notification bell to be alerted for new content. So for those of you who don't know what neo-soul is, it's basically a style that combines trends of retro soul and R&B while adding modern twist to it, combining R&B with other genres of music such as jazz, hip-hop, electronic. So in a sense, neo-soul is the R&B version of post-punk, taking traditional R&B and just stretching it to its experimental limits. If you were me and, part of my generation, this is the type of music that you would see in those like late night commercial, that's my slow jam type commercials they'll play.
Cause all the biggest boot-knocking hits are here. That's my slow jam. The 58 hottest slow jams of all time in one complete 4-CD set for only $29.99.
Yeah. Alright, let's get into it. Let's not waste any more time. First album that we're going to talk about is 1995's D'Angelo's Brown Sugar. This was his first album that he put out, and is usually considered the album that kind of brought neo-soul into the mainstream. Of course, there were other artists, in the late 80s and early 90s, such as Prince, Tony, Terrence Trent D'Arby, that kind of played with this genre, but people didn't really have a name for it. When Brown Sugar came out, people essentially said that, okay, this is the start of a new era in R&B, and they crowned it neo-soul. D'Angelo's Brown Sugar was very against the grain of what was going on in R&B at that time, and that's the kind of thing about D'Angelo. He always was sort of different in the R&B world. He's kind of like, that kid in school that you have in your class, and he's quiet, but he's smart as hell. That's D'Angelo. He's just a different among the pack. He's only released 3 albums. Each one of those albums grew to be more and more experimental. All of those albums were very different from what R&B was doing at the time. Of course, this was the same year that Montel Jordan has This Is How We Do It. R&B was becoming very producer-driven, digitally approached. D'Angelo approached this album with more live instrumentation and just kind of paying tribute to how the 70s soul albums were made. This was co-produced by Tony member Raphael Saadiq, who would go on to have a plentiful producer writing career, but he has in a way become one of the leaders of this genre. The album was also produced by Ali Shaheed Muhammad of A Tribe Called Quest, bringing that hip-hop element into it. Tons of great songs here. The title track, Brown Sugar, is a slow jam classic. Lady, Higher, even his cover of Smokey Robinson's Cruisin' is an amazing song. There has been many, and don't take this the wrong way, but there have been many Prince copycats. D'Angelo, in a sense, is a Prince copycat, but I think he's the best of them. He produces, he writes, he arranges his own songs the way that Prince used to do. And, the way he sings in a high falsetto is very reminiscent of Prince. However, although he is very similar to Prince, he still has his own style. He still brings his own kind of idiosyncratic elements to his music. That's why I think he's dope. Yeah, Brown Sugar, great first album, so check it out. Maxwell's Urban Hang Suite came out year after D'Angelo's Brown Sugar in 1996. This was the first album of Maxwell. Like Brown Sugar, it was also a departure from contemporary R&B, featuring more smooth and groovier R&B elements, but it also fused elements of funk, jazz, and quiet storm music. I mean, obviously this album is influenced by a lot of Sade's 80s work. Maxwell also produced his own music. That's kind of sense of what neo-soul is all about. A lot of these artists were so talented. They were obviously taking kind of the Prince mantle of like, we're going to cultivate our own sound and we're going to reinterpret R&B the way that it should be interpreted. D'Angelo, Maxwell, a couple of artists that we're going to talk about soon, did this approach to much success. Urban Hang Suite was initially wasn't successful like Brown Sugar, but eventually grew to have his cult audience and turned Maxwell into a sex symbol. It's a concept album focused on adult romance. I read an article that this album was influenced by Marvin Gaye's Hear My Dear. Again, another classic 70s soul album. But whereas Hear My Dear was focused on the ending of a relationship and divorce, Maxwell's Urban Hang Suite was more about, the beginnings of romance and first love and how it developed into a serious relationship. I know I keep comparing this album to Brown Sugar, but I think it's helpful to understand that these two albums kind of were instrumental in setting the movement of neo-soul into the mainstream. And so, whereas Brown Sugar was more unconventional, Urban Hang Suite was definitely a lot more traditional, a lot more expansive, as I mentioned, and a lot more smoother than Brown Sugar. This album put Maxwell on the map. A lot of his songs have become classics. Ascension, Something Something. Great album. Check it out. Okay, 1997's Janet Jackson's The Velvet Rope. People don't usually talk about this album and associate with neo-soul as much, but in a sense, when you listen to this album, it kind of does have the same trends of neo-soul at that time. It was definitely Janet's darkest album, and it was her most personal album, but also kind of her most laid-back album. You gotta listen to Control and Rhythm Nation. Had that Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis sound, very New Jack Swing, that harsh kind of electronic sound of the 80s. And Janet, the 1993 album, was kind of taking that soulful direction a little bit. It dipped its toe in the jacuzzi, but it was still kind of poppy. But Velvet Rope is Janet firmly entrenched in neo-soul, combining all sorts of elements of different genres: rock music, electronic, trip-hop, vaporwave. At the time, Janet Jackson just signed the biggest contract in music history, and she basically had just creative control to do whatever she want. And this is the album that came of it. Like I said, it's a dark album. It was at a time when Janet was suffering huge depression. It covers a lot of themes, domestic violence, social networking, self-worth, but even, homosexuality and BDSM. These were topics that mainstream pop albums weren't covering at the time. In a sense, this album basically started alternative R&B, if you really think about it. I mean, Frank Ocean, SZA, The Weeknd, mostly every R&B artist today owes a debt to this album. This album made it okay for pop artists to venture into these type of topics and to kind of be multifaceted with your emotions. There's some great cuts here. The big single Together Again, which is kind of more of an electronic upbeat song, but it talks about losing her friends to HIV, AIDS. You got a song Got to It's Gone, which features a verse from Q-Tip, but also samples an old Joni Mitchell song. You got a cover of Tonight's the Night, but it's reframed as a lesbian anthem. And the song What About is a scorching rock song that deals with Janet just lashing out at her ex-lover for domestic violence and just treating her badly. It's a great quarantine album. Put this on during a rainy day and you're doing nothing. It hits all the emotions. It hits all the feels. And Janet, this is her most sexual album. There's songs in this album that you're gonna need a cigarette after you listen to some of these songs. Velvet Rope, great album. Not her most popular album, but definitely her most critically acclaimed album. It's kind of a shame that Janet Jackson doesn't get a lot of credit for the influence she has had on pop and R&B music nowadays. Maybe it's because Janet Jackson isn't much in the public eye as she used to be, but her discography, and especially this album, deserves more credit for not only putting neo-soul into the mainstream like D'Angelo and Maxwell did, but also making it okay for R&B artists to just have this type of creative freedom to just do whatever they want and expand the sound of R&B. Erykah Badu's Baduizm. This is her first album that came out in 1997. Once again, came out to commercial and critical acclaim. She stated that her album was influenced by Brandy's debut album for its low-key, smooth, and funky sound, and I definitely hear it in a lot of these cuts. Although the album is more influenced by blues and jazz music, people compared her to Nina Simone and Billie Holiday at the time, and I can kind of see where they get it from. The way that she sings, it's very reminiscent as to how a Billie Holiday or Ella Fitzgerald would sing. This album also started a long-term creative relationship with The Roots, who she would collaborate on future projects, especially Things Fall Apart, which came out 2 years later. Yeah, great album, put Erykah Badu on the map. She won Grammy Awards. She became an R&B superstar. The song On and On was on the radio all the time. I remember back in the day, I just remember that visual vividly of Erykah Badu wearing this huge headband. She was cut from a different cloth. Baduizm. Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Now, you could kind of say, music nerd, is this really an R&B album? Isn't it kind of like a hip-hop album? Who cares? I think it's neo-soul. You gotta take into account that, if you're comparing it against Maxwell and D'Angelo, yes, it is more hip-hop focused. Yes, she does rap. But if we're talking about what neo-soul is, this album perfectly encapsulates that. It combines traditional R&B with hip-hop production and influences from reggae and rock. Yeah, it's totally there. But yeah, Miseducation, Lauryn Hill, classic album. This was the first album I remember hearing in full when I was a kid. This album was everywhere. I mean, this huge, came out the gate, just selling tons, millions and millions of copies. Nominated for 10 Grammy Awards. Won 5 Grammy Awards. So many great songs here. Doo-Wop, That Thing, iconic music video, To Zion, X Factor, Everything is Everything. You know the songs. It featured guitar from Carlos Santana, gives a great guitar solo, and To Zion kind of was the beginning of his resurgence of his career, because he released Supernatural the next year in 99. That one was a blockbuster album, won all sorts of awards. Also featured guest vocals from Mary J. Blige and D'Angelo. Great duet with Nothing Really Matters. Now, what I'm about to say is going to sound wild, but go with me here. Lauryn Hill, when she came out with this album and the success that it had, she was really the Billie Eilish of her time. Hold on. Wait a second. Hold your horses. Don't cancel me yet. She's Billie Eilish in a sense that when she came out of the gate in her solo career, she was dubbed the future of music. She had all sorts of critical and commercial success. Everybody was anointing her as a genius. She was credited for taking hip hop and neo soul, those genres can be accessible to the mainstream, to all sorts of races. She was credited for doing that. I remember her on the cover of Time magazine. I think that was a big deal. Billie Eilish, you look at her success today, and people are saying the same things about her. You know, she's the future of music. You know, she's a young genius. She's the defining artist of our generation. People said that about Lauryn Hill back in the day. You know, unfortunately, we didn't get many albums, but she's still, I mean, this album was so big that she's still touring today. Although she only released one studio album, it's better than some people's discographies. Am I mad that she didn't do more beyond this album? Yeah, but it's a pretty damn good album. I mean, really could put one album on this earth. It's a pretty damn good album. So she has bragging rights for sure. Lauryn Hill did her thing. You know, great rap verses, great singing, very talented. If you haven't checked out this album, you're missing out. It's definitely the best of what this genre has to offer. D'Angelo's Voodoo, which came out 2005 years after Brown Sugar came out. If you are a D'Angelo fan, you know that D'Angelo does not have a schedule like most of us. He works when he wants to work. His first album came out in 95, his second album came out 2000, and then he didn't release an album until 2014. So like Lauryn Hill, doesn't really put out a lot of music, but when he does, it's incredible. And Voodoo is an incredible album. It's one of my personal favorite albums. Much different than Brown Sugar. Brown Sugar, although it was different from R&B at the time, Voodoo is a lot more experimental than Brown Sugar. There's not hits on this album. I mean, the closest thing to a hit was that Untitled song, which is furthered by a iconic music video of D'Angelo basically just butt-ass naked in front of a screen. You know, when I was a young kid and seeing that, I was like, what the hell is, who the hell is this clown? But, you know, if you are a woman of a certain age, you definitely remember that video. But it wasn't really a big single like the singles on Brown Sugar. You know, a lot of this album is very groove-based, which is why it kind of diverged from R&B, which was more club-friendly. And once again, you know, D'Angelo said that at the time he hated R&B. He said it was too pop. He said, you know, people weren't taking chances. And, you know, D'Angelo, ever the Icon class, said, you know what, if nobody else is going to do this, I'm going to make the R&B album that I want to make. I don't care if it doesn't have any hits. I don't care if it's not going to be playing the clubs. It's going to be playing the bedroom. All right? It's, people are going to get down. This is, you want to talk about, you know, baby making music. This is, the type of album. But seriously, you know, this album was more expansive in sound. You know, it featured Latin elements, reggae elements, Afrobeat. This album is all over the place in terms of theme. What was also interesting about this album, that it was recorded at Electric Lady Studios, the famous recording studio, you know, created by Jimi Hendrix. It was actually recorded at the same time as another neo-soul classic, Erykah Badu's Mama's Gun, and Common's Like Water for Chocolate, all being recorded in the same studio. And it was such a fertile environment. People such as Q-Tip and Mos Def and The Roots came in, just kind of like, it was a very friendly atmosphere, which contributed to, you know, kind of the vibe of this album. It's very improvisational. It's very, you know, groovy. It's very laid back. It's almost kind of like if you're at a barbecue and you're just like hanging out with your friends. It's that type of vibe. It's very fun type of vibe. But also, you know, people that weren't even on the album just say, hey, just came by to the studio. You know, I read that Rick Rubin came by, and Chris Rock, and even Eric Clapton. I mean, imagine, you know, you're at the studio, it's like, hey, you know, Chris Rock is coming in at 3 p.m. Yeah, come on in. Yeah, Eric Clapton's coming in with, you know, his guitar. Yeah, come on, we got chicken wings. tell Eric to come by. It was that type of environment. It also featured guest verses from Method Man and Redman. Amazing album. I still play it often to this day. We're going to wrap this up with Jill Scott. Who is Jill Scott? This is her first album. Came out in 2000. So, Jill Scott, Philadelphia, R&B legend. This was the start of her career. And like the other neo soul artists that I mentioned, taking modern R&B and blending it with, retro soul. She was kind of like the every woman R&B artist. She talked about topics that were very relatable. If you're from Philadelphia, this album makes me think about Philly. The way that she talks about it, the way that she reminisces about it. She talks about Philadelphia food and Philadelphia culture. The way that she sang, the way that she wrote her lyrics was very conversational. Listen to her, and it's very reminiscent as to what Patti Smith or Lou Reed would, sing in their songs. The way that they sing, it's very poetic, but it's also very down to earth and conversational. Almost like they're talking to you as a friend. And I think Jill Scott brings those same elements. Probably weren't expecting a Jill Scott Lou Reed comparison, but that's how the music nerd gets down. That's a deep half-court shot buzzer beater. As her career grew, as her media visibility grew, she became more popular. She still sells out concerts to this day. She has a loyal fan base. And, a lot of these neo-soul artists, they're not very, they're introspective. You don't really see them in the limelight that often. And what's ironic is that while Jill Scott was probably the most underrated of this crew at the time, she's become the most media savvy. She appears in movies, she appears in TV shows, and you see her out and about. She's putting out music all the time. She's touring all the time. So, props to Jill Scott. Great album. One of a kind artist. And yeah, that will wrap up our beginner's guide to neo soul. If you're looking to get into this genre, lots of great artists, lots of great albums. If you listen to kind of the alternative R&B of today, these were the artists that kind of put those guys on that platform. So we have to give thanks to these legends as well. But leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. What are albums of this era that I may have missed or that you love? Remember to smash the like button down below. Hit the subscribe button if you love this content. More is on the way. I got a Frank Ocean video that's coming up. And I got another Left Turn. I love each and every one of you. Have a good day. Till next time. Peace.